O freedom! Liberty, a state of freedom, especially as opposed to political subjection, imprisonment, or slavery. The state of being free within society from oppression, restrictions imposed by authority on one's way of life, behaviour, or political views. Quote, "The condition upon which God has given liberty to man is eternal vigilance. Vigilance, defined as the action or state of keeping careful watch for possible dangers or difficulties. These dangers could be invasion from foreigners, or ensuring no excess of decadence. In pursuit of freedom, caught in the firing line. Alcohol, drugs, gambling, promiscuity, prostitution, pornography, homosexuality, transgenderism, all defended by the libertarian types under the guise that, quote, most people can enjoy without taking it too far, or, quote, as long as they keep it to themselves in their own homes so it doesn't affect me. Where do we draw the line? Should heroin be readily available on the street because, quote, some heroin users aren't addicts and can just enjoy it without it taking over their lives? Why do we have slot machines in local pubs where those fall victim to the addiction of the win and throw their livelihoods away in pursuance? Is it not for the greater good that despite there being those who may enjoy to gamble, and it is not a serious detriment to them, they simply cannot partake at the local pub because restrictions are in place to keep others from ruining themselves? Is this not a sacrifice we can make? Would we not adapt? People that cannot control themselves, low impulse control, need to be deterred or discriminated against even, so they do not continue their destructive behaviour. But how do we differentiate? Again, where do we draw the line? If instead we hold on to the idea that it is okay as long as they're not hurting anybody else, then what would the social makeup of once great and moral neighbourhoods, towns, states, countries, continents look like when addiction and other negative behaviour runs rampant? Are we not seeing this in California already? Oregon and other Democrat-run states, cities of Canada, suburbs in Australian major cities, etc. A morbidly obese person isn't directly hurting anyone else but themselves. Should this then be normalised? We see it has been already. A transgender isn't directly hurting anyone else but themselves. This has been normalised. Homosexuals just the same. Pushing their luck. We see a recent push for acceptance of pedophilia and the supposed need to differentiate from child molesters. It is alleged that pedophilia is an attraction without action, whereas it is alleged that molestation is an action sometimes without attraction, and that we need to treat those attracted to minors with compassion, so-called minor attracted people, MAPS. Yes, this is a real thing. You don't need to come to terms with reality, it will be. Men in women's change rooms is another talking point. The argument made by the progressives is the man isn't hurting anyone. I asked, does this allow for public nudity? Public intercourse between consenting adults? After all, it is not hurting anyone. What about animals? Bestiality doesn't hurt humans. What it comes back to is that these are moral questions. There is no morality in letting people do as they wish. Some people, left to their own devices, will pursue and embrace their darkest elements. Old-fashioned. Freedom represented in ever-sexualized clothing for women. Think of today's supposed swimwear, or excessively shorter skirts and dresses, and ever-increasing cleavage. One element that separated our civilized societies from that of the primitive Africans or Australian Aboriginals, for example, was that we were heavily clothed. For the rich, this was to an extreme degree, or at the very least would cover our private parts. Look at England's Elizabethan era dresses the women would wear. Should we, in the pursuit of absolute freedom, allow or even encourage our women to walk the streets naked? Is that decent of us? It sure may feel superficially, quote, freeing for the young woman who catches the eyes of the men in her vicinity, but is that what a future mother should be wanting for herself and her eventual daughters? No room for morality. Is it absolute freedom above morality? If it is absolute freedom above all, then it is the expectation that people will make rash decisions in pursuance of absolute freedom, endangering themselves and often others in the process, without consequence, as freedom would then entirely be the bedrock and operating system. People who act without thought of consequence are the most dangerous. The third world supposed asylum seekers do not fear law and order, as they do not have this where they are from. They have unfettered, quote, freedom. They have survival. How can the freedom above all people reconcile with the atrocious outcomes of alcoholism, drug and gambling addiction, and prostitution? These are all life-destroying, and especially if or when it applies to someone they know. How can they rationalize Africans breaking into families' homes as they sleep, which would only be deterred by law and order, justice, which is derived from a moral judgment, i.e., a person's safety, their life, and their property are of value, and greater in value than the African's desire to steal their property. So the decision is made that the African will face imprisonment for their, quote, crime. Why are self-destructive behaviours not considered crimes against oneself? And do we not have a duty or obligation to save them from themselves? If we aren't to save them, and we can't imprison them, as supposedly no crime has been committed, can we at least deport them? Limitations within law, otherwise anarchy. Where there is law and order, there is by nature elements that limit freedom. There is more freedom in African and South American countries, places with less or close to no real law and order or large-scale corruption. Are these places in which you would want your family to reside? Why are murder rates so high in these regions? Their nature may have less impulse control, but it is sure because their people have far less of a moral compass and have not developed law and order as a deterrence across their societies. They are still trying to survive. You can have order with limitations, or you can have no limitations with disorder. Is this a risk you're willing to take with the introduction of mass foreigners who do not value the lives of you and your family, your people? It would be one thing if the population was entirely homogeneous, thus strong sense of nation could be channeled, i.e., I would not rob my neighbour, as that is a father of my countrymen, or I would not rape a woman, as that is a daughter of my countrymen. We are no longer a homogeneous people, and what comes with that is an over-reliance on policing and the judicial system rather than self-governance. Who is in control? The progressive types, those crying out for dignity over liberty and civility over freedom. These are the types that so-called conservatives are opposed to. Not that conservatives vocalize or organize around their opposition, because for the conservative type, he believes it is liberty and freedom he holds most dear. Really what he holds dear is order, justice, what is right. I wonder if it has dwelled upon the white Christian men that their nations have literally been handed over to feminism-riddled women, weak men, non-whites, and Jews. This includes the power structures at every level across all facets: education, media, social policy, economic policy, etc. These are groups who certainly cannot be entrusted to uphold the likes of dignity and civility, despite how much they call for it. Their version of dignity is complete freedom, the drug addicts, the prostitutes, and as we see in the homosexuals and transgender push on children with their reading material and digital media. Libertarian quote free market shortcomings. From my previous video on Nation and the Libertarian candidate Jordan Ditloff, I'll follow here. Other critics of the libertarian ideology are proven right again here. It seems they are hands-off as our country gets taken, and they'll merely, quote, fight for our right to free speech relating to anything that is not immigration or nationalism, at which point you are labelled a Nazi or white supremacist. This is where the libertarian will denounce you. They also fight for the right to promote deregulation which will benefit big business, not the worker. Not to mention ease and restriction on immigration to further undermine the Australian man, the family wage. They're beholden to individualism, freedom, and liberty. But what we need at a time like this is to galvanise, collectivise, unite, strengthen, and honour. They are the types complicit in domestic manufacturing shutting down, as overseas slave labour undercut our fair-waged products. All this in the name of, quote, private enterprise, markets, and efficiency. I assume they accept illicit drug consumption, alcohol abuse, gambling, pornography addiction, predatory money lending or usury, ease of divorce, birth control, abortion, euthanasia, transgender genital mutilation surgery, all as fine evidence of free exchange in the name of freedoms and liberty. What happens when violent foreigners yearning for material sees them rob their neighbour at knife point? Where are the libertarians on that? The intruder merely wants the freedoms this property will provide. The libertarians, not a party we want in control, but currently a party well positioned to pick up seats, making part of the crossbench to the current uni party. What good comes of it? The libertarian type, the freedom type, the lockdown protester, the free speech advocate. What good is them having free speech? What have they done with that freedom, these supposed rights? They have watched on the sideline the normalization of pornography, birth control, abortion, promiscuity, degeneracy, homosexuality, transgenderism, medication and big pharma, addiction, vices, gluttony, fat celebration, divorce, single motherhood, the growth of the welfare state, education of our children to hate their ancestry, villainizing themselves for being white, promoting non-whites into positions of power. They have watched all of this unfold. What good is their word? Judge them by their fruits. It is only nationalists that require right to speech, as they are the ones advocating for the preservation of the race, the nation. Libertarians will put up with any condition as it relates to national identity, the ethnic makeup, so long as they can complain about taxes. With conviction and numbers, they may have very well been able to battle the state when taxes were first introduced here in Australia. Have it your way. Ask the libertarian, what good is it protesting the lockdowns if when you are successful and are handed your autonomy, you are surrounded by those not of your own when you leave the house? Protesting the power and overreach of the state when you've allowed the state to be infiltrated by individuals with foreign allegiance, organisations lobbying, bribing the state and its representatives to push their foreign people's agenda. When you leave it to the, quote, market to decide on industry, losing all self-sufficiency in manufacturing, what made us a developed nation, as it is lost to developing nations? When millions of aliens on working visas or fake student visas will undercut you and your family's wages in the trade your fathers have done for generations, when the market allows you to trade, but all those you are trading with are owned by foreign groups using imported foreign labour to overtake and undermine white, Western and European countries on the global stage. This trade is not benefiting your people, the nation. Education and motherhood. When your children are still being taught to hate their ancestry, when your children are learning sexual education at 6 years old, when the free market has ensured your children will never afford a house due to a government captured by big business, banking, construction and property development lobby, furthering mass immigration and easing of money borrowing criteria. Working 2 jobs, putting your child in daycare, school and after school care. When you have the freedom to, quote, criticize education in your meaningless, pithy ways, only to have your child as the only white child in their class. When you have the choice of which religion you hope to raise your son with, only for his mother to divorce you, incentivized by the state, take your house, move another man into the house, and end up the son being convinced by, quote, the market to sever his own genitals. The hope to raise your daughter to be like that of your grandmother's, only for her to get on birth control at the suggestion of her other single, promiscuous, likely medicated, quote, friends, to have sex with countless men unfit for being fathers for your grandchildren, abandoning her natural obligations and duties as a mother with no concern in the world, just living her best life with all the, quote, freedom you have fought for her to have, she will be left broken. The libertarian will just let, quote, the market decide what is and what isn't relating to homosexuality, transgenderism, sterilization, birth control, abortion, euthanasia, divorce, and immigration. A principled stance. But bring up vaccination and they claim their absolute principles, the right to, quote, informed consent. What about the Australians' informed consent to have their country taken away from them through immigration, the modern warfare, the compassion invasion? Only the nationalist will take a principled stance of his own conviction, despite popular, quote, public opinion, i.e. the market, shunning him for it, calling him a racist, a white supremacist, a Nazi, all while you sit on the sidelines on the one issue that shapes a nation. This is why the libertarian must advocate for nationalist right to free speech, because the nationalist is the only one who is going to push an agenda of re-establishing order, putting nation first and, quote, the market second. The libertarian, like the World War II propagandized boomer, lets the big box in the living room tell him what is and what isn't popular narrative. Because if his work has amounted to something, it is that in the, quote, market of ideas, whatever ends up on television is what is correct. All you see is them advocate for small government, freedom of speech, freedom of choice, autonomy, freedom of consumption, but have they rallied behind the real issue, the one that changes the fabric of our society, that is immigration? But I'll fight for your right to say it. If you consider you have the right to lecture me on my, quote, incorrect preference to have a land made of my own people, then I too have the right to hold this preference dear, and that your preference for aliens is, quote, incorrect in my calculation. You can advocate for foreigners to have claim to it, but are you also advocating for white Australians to have claim to other nations? Or you wouldn't want to ruffle any feathers, i.e. demand anything from non-whites? Fair is fair, after all, in the name of equal opportunity. It is a race to power, and once we nationalists have it, you foreign advocates will simply be ignored, as it looks like you have been already for where the country is. Where was your resistance? The ones who let the, quote, free market of international finance gamify and speculate on basic shelter, the apparatus that has furthered wealth divide in a country that once thrived from its middle class. The media monopoly ownership collected through the, quote, free market, which shapes narrative and denounces real nationalists. How well we have it. A couple of images here. You, current day, paying $1,600 a month for a 1-bedroom apartment, no space, no garden, rarely at home because you're always working. It's images of a crowded train, it looks like, or a bus. Other image, a literal peasant in 1890, and it's a large house on a large plot of land. Another here, medieval peasants worked only about 150 days in a year. The church believed it was important to keep them happy with mandatory and frequent holidays. You have less holidays than a medieval peasant. Optics. An interesting point here from Tate in reference to government, quote, "They let you do the degenerate stuff that other dictatorships don't do to give you the illusion of freedom. They won't let you do anything that matters." Couple images here. The same government that pays drag queens to read to toddlers claims to worry about the safety of your children online. Another. If your city bans straws but hands out free needles, you're being governed by idiots. Another one here from Mark and Bruce on South Australia in Focus. The image reads, "Corporate media asking government, how would you like this wrapped?" It's a box that says control of movement, and the two wrapping options are anti-terrorism or protecting the kids. It's all about optics. Fundamentals. Remember that man can truly be free through his industriousness, self-sufficiency. Woman and child, on the other hand, are dependent by nature. When it is woman advocating for her absolute freedom, like being on birth control, killing her child by abortion, divorcing her husband, collecting government benefits as a single mother, realize she does not know what real freedom entails, that is, self-sufficiency, of which she does not have an ability for. Let her down easy. Just as a young boy saying he wants to run away from home, he is emotional. Allow him to come back to his senses. If he does not in time, bring him back. It is a sign of regression when pleasure begins to be considered as the highest principle. He who cannot obey himself will be commanded. That is the nature of living creatures. A man who lacks purpose distracts himself with pleasure. Summary. Think of what matters: your people, their prosperity, their future. Do not stand back and watch those you care about destroy themselves with abusive tendencies and behavior. This could be in the form of drugs, alcohol, or gambling. Do not stand back and watch foreigners destroy your country, your people's home. Become vocal. Do not stand back and watch big international corporations siphon every last dollar out of local business in the name of, quote, free markets, those lobbying for mass immigration and ever less restrictions to undercut and suppress our wages, replacing us with slave labour in our own land. Become vocal. Discuss with friends and family, better understand their perspectives. Rally behind real nationalist advocates, those who will fight to further our people's cause, or in this modern anti-white climate, fight to retain our people's ability to self-determine. That is all. Thanks for watching. Share if you found insightful. Comment your thoughts, criticisms, or future video topic suggestions. Thank you.